Let's start with the part most people are not ready to hear. The person who pulled away from you, confused you, kept you close just enough to keep your hope alive, and then left you carrying the weight alone, did not understand what they were destroying. They thought they were protecting themselves. They thought distance would make life easier. They thought silence would save them. But what they really did was cut themselves off from something rare, and they did it before they had the emotional ability to measure its value. This is not a revenge story. It is not a neat little fantasy where the one who caused pain gets hit with instant pain back. That is too simple. This is deeper than that. This is about what happens slowly, privately, and almost invisibly inside a person after they betray someone who loved them in a real way. Stay with me, because this next part changes everything. The damage they caused you was obvious. The damage they caused themselves was delayed. That is why it is so hard to see at first. That is why it can look like they walked away untouched. But untouched is not what happened. Not even close. What happened is that they made a decision in emotional darkness, and only later did the lights come on. And when they finally saw what they had done, they were no longer standing in the same life. By then, the loss was real. By then, you were no longer waiting. By then, the door they assumed would stay open forever had already become a wall. The first truth you need to understand is why they had no idea. That part matters. It matters because if you do not understand their blindness, you might still secretly believe they knew exactly what you were worth and still chose to hurt you anyway with full awareness. In many cases, that is not how it works. People like this often move through connection with a kind of emotional distortion. While love is present, they downplay it. While care is being offered, they minimize it. While someone is giving them patience, depth, honesty, and warmth, they act as if it is normal, replaceable, manageable, something they can step away from and return to whenever they feel like it. They do not fully register the value of what is in front of them while it is still there. That is the tragedy. The very system they built to protect themselves from pain also blocks them from deeply feeling what they have. So they underestimate the bond. They underestimate the person. They underestimate the consequences. They think they are gambling with something stable, something that can take neglect, mixed signals, emotional absence, long silences, partial effort, and still remain available. They think real love will keep waiting. They think true loyalty can be stretched forever. They think someone with depth will always understand one more excuse, absorb one more retreat, survive one more cold season. Most people miss this. They assume distance means certainty. Often it means blindness. It means the person is making choices without accurate emotional information. They are acting like the loss will be small because they literally cannot feel the full size of it yet. And when I say betrayal, I do not mean only the loud kind. I do not mean only cheating, lying in obvious ways, or doing something dramatic enough that nobody could deny it. Betrayal can be quiet. It can be subtle. It can happen through withdrawal at the exact moment your heart needed presence. It can happen through silence when honesty was required. It can happen through being warm enough to build your trust and then cold enough to slowly break it apart. It can happen through accepting your love while refusing to meet it with the same openness. It can happen through making you carry the emotional labor of two people while they keep one foot outside the relationship, ready to retreat whenever closeness starts to feel too real. And that kind of betrayal is brutal because it leaves marks that are harder to explain. There is no single scene to point to, no clean ending, no one dramatic moment, just a long pattern of being almost chosen, almost met, almost loved in full. That gets into the nervous system. That confusion changes the body. It teaches you to doubt your own reading of reality. It makes you question whether what hurt you was even real enough to name. But it was real. Your pain was not an overreaction. Your exhaustion was not weakness. Your heartbreak was not imagination. You were responding to repeated emotional fracture. And here is the part they usually do not understand until much later. Each time they pulled away instead of showing up, each time they protected themselves at the cost of the bond, they were not only hurting you, they were training themselves to lose what they claimed they wanted. Now here is where the story turns. The consequence usually does not hit them right away. In the beginning, it can look like they are fine, sometimes more than fine, calm, focused, even relieved, And from your side, that can feel unbearable. You are sitting in the wreckage, trying to make sense of what happened, while they appear composed, functional, untouched. It can make you feel foolish for loving deeply. It can make you wonder if the whole connection mattered only to you. But the early calm is not proof that they did not care. It is proof that their defense system is doing exactly what it was built to do. It is suppressing. It is reframing. It is numbing. It is turning something emotionally massive into something mentally manageable. That is why they can seem fine in the short term. They are not processing. They are surviving. They are keeping the full truth away from the surface because if it reached them all at once, it would shake the structure they rely on to stay functional. So they keep moving. They distract. They rationalize. They tell themselves it was necessary or inevitable or not that serious or better this way. They may even convince themselves that the relationship was too much, that the closeness was pressure, that your needs were the problem, that walking away was strength. But suppression has a shelf life. Reality is patient, and eventually reality starts winning, not through a dramatic punishment, through a slow collision between the story they told themselves and the truth they can no longer avoid. And when that collision begins, it does not feel clean. It feels like waking up too late. Usually the reckoning starts with something small on the surface and huge underneath. It might be your absence, but not the fresh absence they expected. Not the version where they assume you are still emotionally nearby, still wounded, still reachable, still keeping a quiet space for them in your life. No. It begins when they feel the settled absence of someone who has actually moved on. Someone who is no longer waiting for a text, no longer decoding mixed signals, no longer arranging their emotional world around another person's confusion. That is different. That hits differently. Or maybe they see you from a distance in some form, and you are not broken in the way they unconsciously expected. You are clearer, calmer, more solid, more yourself. There is a steadiness in you now. A quiet self-respect, a kind of clean energy that says your life is moving and it is not circling around them anymore. That is often when the first crack appears, because their mind had been treating the loss like something temporary, like a connection paused, like a door still unlocked. And suddenly they have evidence that it is not temporary at all. The door did not stay open. It closed, softly maybe, without announcement, but fully. And the life on the other side kept going. This is where it gets deeper. When they realize you are no longer emotionally available to the version of them that thought they could always return later, the emotional math changes fast. What once felt manageable starts looking irreversible. What once felt like freedom starts feeling like miscalculation. And the reality they worked so hard not to feel begins entering in full. The first layer of that reckoning is mental clarity, and it is sharper than people think. They start seeing what they had with new eyes. Not the reduced version, not the emotionally filtered version that made losing you feel survivable, the real version. They begin to remember your patience and understand it was not weakness. They remember how deeply you saw them, and now they realize how rare that was. They remember how many times you tried to communicate, repair, understand, stay calm, stay loving, stay open. They remember the warmth they took for granted, the softness they kept testing, the honesty they met with hesitation, the loyalty they assumed would keep renewing itself no matter how little they gave back. And these memories do not arrive as sweet nostalgia. They arrive with force, because once the mind stops suppressing, it often overcorrects. The details become clearer than before. The emotional value becomes harder to deny. They begin to understand that what they lost was not just attention, not just affection, not just companionship. They lost a particular kind of bond, the kind that does not show up every day, the kind that makes a person feel more real in their own life, the kind that quietly supports parts of them they never knew how to grow alone. And now that awareness hurts because it comes with a brutal second realization. They were not unlucky. They were not merely misunderstood. They participated in the destruction, through action, through inaction, through delay, through emotional half measures. Through every moment they chose distance over courage. And once they see that pattern clearly, it becomes very hard to hide from themselves. That second layer is shame, and it is heavier than regret. Regret says, I wish I had done something differently. Shame says, I can now see what my choices say about the version of me that made them. That is why this stage hits so hard. They do not just miss you, they see themselves more clearly, and they do not always like what they find. They see the moments when you needed presence and they gave confusion. They see the moments when truth would have protected the bond and they chose avoidance instead. They see the pattern of coming close, then pulling back, giving hope, then removing stability, accepting love, then refusing to stand inside it fully. They see how long you carried both your feelings and theirs. They see how many times you extended grace they had not earned. They see how often you tried to keep the door open while they kept testing whether care could survive neglect. And when all of that finally lands, it creates a very private kind of pain. Because now the issue is no longer just loss. It is self-confrontation. It is the realization that they had something real in their hands and handled it with a level of emotional immaturity that cost them more than they knew. And the mind cannot easily escape that once it becomes visible. They may try. They may distract again. They may jump into new attention, new routines, new stories about why it all happened, but the truth is already inside. Once a person sees the gap between the love they were offered and the way they responded to it, the knowledge stays. It becomes part of the room. Even when they stop speaking about it, they keep living beside it. So when I say betraying, you ruined their life, I am not talking about a visible collapse. I am not saying they lose their job, their looks, their social image, or every good thing around them. Sometimes their life on the outside stays impressive. Sometimes they look successful. Sometimes they look perfectly okay. But the real damage is internal. The betrayal ruins their access to a certain quality of life. It cuts them off from a version of themselves that could only exist in the presence of the love they pushed away. Think about that carefully. Certain relationships do more than give comfort. They call parts of a person forward. They make someone softer without making them weak. They make someone more honest, more alive, more emotionally integrated, more connected to their own depth. And when a person repeatedly betrays that kind of bond, they do not just lose the relationship. They lose the environment where that better self was becoming possible. That matters. It matters more than most people understand. Because after the relationship ends, they can go back to functioning, back to independence, back to self-protection, back to control. But now those old defenses do not feel as clean as they once did. The self-sufficiency that once looked like strength can start to feel like a ceiling. The emotional control that once felt intelligent can start to feel like emptiness with good posture. The distance that once felt safe can start to feel expensive, and that is a different kind of ruin. Quiet, invisible, but real. Not a destroyed life in the dramatic sense, but a life permanently haunted by the knowledge of what deeper living could have been. And here is something even more serious. The betrayal does not only change what they lost, it changes what they become if they do not face it honestly. Every major choice shapes a person. Not forever in a fixed way, because people can change, but enough to matter. Every time someone chooses defense over openness, when openness was possible, that defensive path gets stronger. Every time they withdraw instead of staying present, that withdrawal becomes more automatic. Every time they betray the person who deserved better because courage felt too dangerous, they make that kind of betrayal easier to repeat. This is not punishment from outside, it is structure being built from the inside. Patterns become personality when repeated long enough. So if they do not truly confront what happened, the wall gets thicker. The distance becomes more natural. The split between the real self and the protected self becomes more practiced. From the outside, they may still function well. They may smile. They may date again. They may speak confidently. They may even convince others and sometimes themselves that everything is fine. But beneath that, a deeper cost keeps growing. They are living inside the emotional architecture their own choices built. And once you know another way was possible, once you have tasted real connection and then sabotaged it, the ordinary replacements do not feel the same. This is why later relationships can feel flatter. This is why attention from others does not fully satisfy. This is why the quiet hours become important. Because in the quiet, the truth gets louder. In the quiet, comparison begins. In the quiet, what was rare becomes more visible precisely because it is gone. And yes, they may try to replace the experience. People do this all the time. They chase novelty. They seek validation. They keep busy. They collect distractions that make life feel full enough to avoid emotional stillness. But rare connection is not easily replaced by volume. Depth is not replaced by options. Being truly seen is not replaced by being wanted. And that is where the emptiness starts showing up in small ways. It shows up in conversations that feel pleasant but not nourishing, in closeness that looks good on paper but never reaches the same emotional temperature, in moments that should feel warm but somehow feel slightly hollow, in the strange ache that appears when life gets quiet and there is nobody there who knew them the way you did, nobody who met both the defended version and the hidden one and stayed long enough to love beyond the performance. Stay with me here, because this is the part a lot of people rush past. The deepest consequence is not that they suffer every second. It is that their life becomes interrupted by flashes of truth, a certain evening, a certain memory, a certain kind of silence, a certain version of loneliness that no crowd can fix. That is when they feel it, not always dramatically, sometimes just as a private drop in the chest, a thought they quickly push away, a comparison they do not want to finish, a realization that the one person who brought out something real in them is no longer reachable in the same way. That repetition matters. It becomes part of their inner climate, not enough to stop life, enough to change its texture, enough to make success feel incomplete, enough to make emotional control feel less like mastery and more like exile. Now I want to say something very clearly, because this is where your healing can either deepen or get delayed. Knowing that they suffer later can bring relief. That is human. After being hurt, it matters to know the story did not end with them walking away untouched. It matters to know the connection was real enough to leave a mark on them too. It matters to know your love was not meaningless. Your presence was not disposable. Your absence is not invisible. If part of you feels calmer hearing that, there is nothing wrong with that. But do not let that become the center of your recovery, because the moment your healing depends on what they feel, your life is still orbiting their awareness, and your life is too valuable for that. The real story is not only that they lost something, the real story is what you built after the loss. While they were delaying feeling, you were doing the hard work of actually feeling. While they were suppressing, you were processing. While they were running from emotional truth, you were sitting in it, even when it hurt, even when it felt endless, even when it stripped you down to the rawest parts of yourself. And that kind of honest suffering, as cruel as it feels in the moment, often builds something powerful. It builds self-respect. It builds emotional clarity. It builds stronger boundaries. It builds the ability to recognize inconsistency faster. It builds a refusal to beg for what should be given freely. It builds a deeper relationship with yourself. And that matters more than any delayed regret they may ever carry, because their lesson is a consequence. Yours can become a transformation. Think about the difference carefully. Their pain often comes from realizing too late what they lost. Your growth comes from learning through pain what you will never abandon in yourself again. That is not the same thing. They may be haunted by the version of themselves that could have existed with you, but you are building the version of yourself that exists because you survived them. There is power in that. Quiet power. Real power. The kind that does not need to announce itself. The kind that shows up in your standards, your peace, your sharper instincts, your calmer nervous system, your unwillingness to confuse breadcrumbs for love. This is why the ending of the story is not actually about their regret. It is about your return to yourself. It is about the part of you that stopped trying to earn consistency from inconsistency. It is about the moment you realized that your depth is not too much for the right person, only unbearable for the wrong one. It is about learning that love without presence is not enough, that chemistry without safety is not enough, that promises without steady action are not enough. And once you truly learn that, something changes permanently. You become harder to fool, but not harder to love. That is important. Do not become smaller because someone mishandled your heart. Become clearer. Become wiser. Become more rooted in reality. Let the pain refine your standards, not poison your softness. Because your softness was never the problem. Your willingness to love was never the flaw. The problem was giving sacred access to someone who could not honor what they were touching. And if they do wake up one day and feel the full truth, what they will understand is not just that they lost a person. They will understand they lost a mirror that reflected back a more human version of themselves. They will understand that your love did not simply comfort them. It challenged them without humiliating them. It reached toward parts of them they had buried. It offered a chance at a fuller life. And because they could not handle the vulnerability required to stay inside that kind of love, they broke the very space that could have helped them grow. That realization is heavy. It has weight because it exposes the cost of fear. Fear feels protective in the moment. Later, it can look like theft. Theft of intimacy, theft of possibility, theft of the future that might have been built if courage had arrived on time. And here is the hardest part for them. Once you have truly moved on, there is no easy repair for that. Some losses do not return in original form. Some people do not come back emotionally available after they finally rebuild themselves. Some bonds cannot survive repeated mishandling. So even if understanding comes, it often comes after the conditions for repair are gone. That is why the regret can become so enduring. Not because there is endless drama, but because there is no clean undo button. The truth arrives in a room where the past is no longer waiting, and that can stay with a person for years in ways they rarely confess out loud. So do not mistake the delay for the absence of consequence. Time does not erase emotional truth. Sometimes it reveals it, slowly, precisely, relentlessly. The person who betrayed you may not have understood what you were when you were standing right in front of them. They may not have known what your loyalty was worth, what your presence was doing for them, what your love was protecting in them, what your patience was holding together. They were making choices in the dark, and by the time they finally saw in full light, the landscape had changed. You were no longer there in the same way. The bond was no longer alive in the same way. The chance was no longer available in the same way. That is the consequence. Not loud justice, not perfect symmetry, just truth arriving after avoidance has already spent the future. And if that truth ruins anything, it ruins the fantasy that they can keep choosing fear without eventually paying in meaning, in depth, in connection, in the quality of their own inner life. That cost is real. But listen carefully, because this is the final turn and it matters most. What matters more than the price they pay is the value you recovered. You found out that your love is real. You found out that your intuition was not broken. You found out that even after confusion, silence, distance, and grief, you could still come back to yourself with more dignity than before. That is the part no one can take from you. You were hurt by someone who did not fully understand what they had. That is painful. It is unfair. It leaves questions that do not always get answered in the way the heart wants. But in the empty space their confusion created, you were forced to meet yourself more honestly. You were forced to discover what your spirit can survive. You were forced to build self-trust where there used to be waiting. You were forced to choose your own life again and again until it stopped feeling like survival and started feeling like power. And that is the real ending. Not their collapse, not their regret, not the day they finally understand. The real ending is that you did not disappear because they failed to hold you well. You did not lose your worth because they lacked the vision to recognize it. You did not become less lovable because they could not meet love with equal courage. They lost access to what you brought into their life. But you, through all of this, gained access to something lasting. A deeper self-respect, a stronger inner voice, a cleaner standard, a love for yourself that is no longer willing to live on crumbs. That is the story that matters. That is the story that lasts. So let them carry whatever truth finally reaches them. Let them sit with the life their choices created. Your task is different now. Keep your heart, but sharpen your sight. Keep your depth, but protect your peace. Keep your softness, but never again offer it where presence is absent. And remember this if nothing else. They lost someone who could love deeply and stay real. You found someone too. You found yourself. And this time, do not let go.